So today we are going to talk about a groundbreaking study, and it was conducted in the 1990s, and it's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. Some of you may already be familiar with it. It is better known as the ACE study. And in that study, they conducted an analysis, an investigation on the traumatic impacts on health outcomes. So if there was trauma in a young person's life before the age of 18, what were those health outcomes for that person as an adult? And so that's what that study looked at. And the study was conducted by Dr. Vincent Folletti in partnership with Robert Anda of the Center for Disease Control, as well as Kaiser Permanente. Study participants were asked a series of questions about 10 different categories of adverse experiences. The categories included abuse, physical, emotional, or sexual, neglect, physical or emotional, and household dysfunction, including mental illness, incarcerated relative, having a mother that was treated violently, substance abuse, or divorce. Participants were predominantly white, college educated, middle class, and they all had health insurance. Not exactly a cross-section of the society. We know that marginalized and minoritized communities have higher ACE scores. And so in this study, and at this time, it was still pretty surprising in what they found. And the two key findings that they found were that ACEs were incredibly common, more common than they had actually realized, and that the higher your ACE score, the higher your risk for a chronic disease outcome later in life. And so how the ACE scores were actually determined was in this way. So basically, if you had an ACE score of 0, that meant you had no adverse childhood experiences. Whereas if you had 10 adverse childhood experiences, your ACE score was 10. So what they found in this study was that 70% of the participants had at least one ACE, and that they also found a quarter of the participants had at least 3 or more ACEs. Researchers then examined the relationship between ACE scores and a variety of negative health outcomes and found a strong connection and correlation. The pattern they identified was that the higher the ACE score, the higher the risk of impact on health outcomes. It's important to note that this is not a two-way street. In fact, just because you have a certain health outcome doesn't mean that you had ACEs. If an individual has challenge with depression or anxiety or a chronic illness, that doesn't mean that they had adverse childhood experiences. Childhood ACEs do result in many negative health outcomes that can have a lifelong impact, even reducing life expectancy. Negative health outcomes include heart, lung, and liver disease, death by suicide, HIV and STDs, and other leading causes of death. If an individual has an ACE score of 6 or more, their life expectancy is 20 years less than their peers who have fewer or no traumatic experiences. The ACE study principal investigator, Dr. Vincent Folletti, summed up his findings as follows. Adverse childhood experiences are common, destructive, and have an effect that often lasts for a lifetime. They are the most important determinant of the health and well-being of our nation. This discovery has many policy implications, specifically related to when and how we invest in the well-being of our communities. The United States spends billions of dollars responding to the downstream outcomes of ACEs, high blood pressure, heart disease, and diabetes, for example. But what if we had a way to inoculate young people against the lifelong impacts of adverse experiences? In fact, we can. In fact, we know from research that positive childhood experiences actually buffer and act as a mitigating factor, a protective factor against trauma, adverse childhood experiences, and toxic stress. And so even in adults who have had adverse childhood experiences, those adults who also had positive childhood experiences and had loving, safe, supportive, nourishing, and nurturing relationships with the people around them where they felt safe and they had a sense of belonging in their community, even though they had adverse childhood experiences, they still fared better. And so educators play a vital role in being a buffering factor for young people experiencing toxic stress and trauma. If a student has an ACE score of 4 or more, they are 32 times more likely to have an attention or behavior problem. And this statistic is very powerful and really drives our work at Sound Discipline with educators and families. Students don't come in and tell you that they have an ACE score of 4. They don't come in and say, hey, I've already had 4 adverse experiences and I'm only 7 years old. Using trauma-informed approaches in the classroom helps not only those students with high ACE scores, it helps all children. We know that exposure to intense, frequent, or sustained stress without the buffering care of a supportive adult can physically change children's brains and bodies. This can disrupt learning, behavior, immunity, growth, hormonal systems, immune systems, and even the way DNA is read and transcribed. The brains of the children experiencing toxic stress and adverse childhood experiences is highly adaptive. So this is not the case where the child has a bad brain or a good brain. There's nothing wrong with the child. The child is not broken. The child has a brain, and that brain is highly adaptive, and it is adapting to the context in which that child has been living in. So this brain is doing what it was designed to do. It was designed and adapted to serve this student, to serve this child in staying alive, to surviving, to getting through their days. And so because of ACEs, young people might not be ready to learn in the same way that we think they should be ready to learn. They may seem defiant. They may seem not present. And it's really not about that. It's that their brain has other priorities. And it doesn't matter that we want them to do something. And it doesn't matter to their brain that we want them to listen to us. And so just knowing that might support you in how you engage with that young person, because now you are looking through a lens of trauma and trying to understand and shifting your perspective of what might be going on. And so as we shift our lens around behavior, we will learn about something called a dysregulated nervous system running underneath. What we see as behavior may actually be a strategy to stay safe. A problem or misbehavior we see is a solution to a different problem we don't see, usually out of the awareness of the child. It's less important what caused it, but what we do about it matters. We can begin to wonder not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. So we are going to go into a conversation about how educators can become buffering adults for young people experiencing trauma and toxic stress. Thank you for joining us.